Southern Scotland to bring some strong wind gusts to the northeast and some gales around northern and western coast of Scotland, along with heavy rain for a time. That rain sinks south overnight, and so by the start of Wednesday it's wet for southern Scotland, Cumbria, Northern Ireland, and it is also increasingly windy through the Irish Sea. A mild night though, a very mild night in places, 14 or 15 Celsius in the south. Colder further north, but actually a brighter day to come there for northern and northwest Scotland. A few showers expected later. It's through the central zone where we're going to see strong winds blowing through the Irish Sea, and Cumbria, southwest Scotland, North Wales seeing some very wet weather, risk of flooding in places. That rain sinks south on Thursday and Friday, and it stays mild everywhere.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moreki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely. Whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To the Point.
Good evening, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we look at the stories that have got people talking today. Coming up tonight, the NHS, of course, seems to be in dire straits, but is yet more money the answer? Is it that simple? And should people be allowed to protest against the COVID vaccine at the school gates? And what about student degrees? Ministers are looking at limiting student numbers on creative degrees in an effort to combat the massive amount of student loans which are never repaid. So we'll have that and lots more. But first, let's take a look at the news headlines.
Hello there, I'm Polly Middlehurst and here are your GB News headlines. The national living wage is set to rise 59 pence to £9.50 an hour from April next year. The Treasury announcement, which is part of the autumn budget, means full-time workers will see their income increase by more than £1,000 every year. The government says £5.9 billion is also being made available to help tackle NHS backlogs. The Chief Medical Officer in Wales has warned that draconian COVID restrictions could be reintroduced in the country if cases there continue to rise. Dr. Frank Atherton says he's disappointed to see many people have stopped wearing masks and have failed to social distance. The country's coronavirus infection rate is now at its highest level since the pandemic began. 3,152 new positive cases were reported on Sunday, with a further 12 deaths. The Brexit Minister, Lord Frost, says the European Union's proposals to solve the Northern Ireland Protocol don't go far enough. Speaking before the Commons European Scrutiny Committee, Lord Frost argued some of the ideas put forward by the EU were problematic, but added the UK government welcomed aspects of the proposals.
What we're trying to test is whether they could found the basis to go further than what they've put on the table. So that's the kind of discussion that we're having. And it has been quite constructive so far, but the gaps between us remain significant, and there's a lot of working through to go.
Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen has told a parliamentary committee that the social media giant was, in her words, unquestionably making online hate worse. Ms Haugen is giving evidence to the Joint Committee for the Draft Online Safety Bill as part of government plans for social media regulation. Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg previously rejected her claims, saying her attacks on the company were misrepresenting the work that it does.
And I came forward now because now is the most critical time to act. When we see something like an oil spill, that oil spill doesn't make it harder for a society to regulate oil companies. But right now, the failures of Facebook are making it harder for us to regulate Facebook.
The average UK petrol price has reached an all-time high at 142.94 pence a litre. That's after prices beat records set in 2012 at the weekend by 0.46 pence. Diesel prices as well reached 146.5 pence a litre. The RAC calling it a dark day for drivers that will hurt many household budgets. Scotland's First Minister says the COP26 Global Climate Conference in Glasgow could be the last opportunity to avert a climate catastrophe. Nicola Sturgeon says the country is now in a unique position to bridge the gaps in conversation between world leaders. Speaking to school children in Downing Street, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson says meeting the goals of COP26 will be very, very tough, but thinks it can be done.
We need as many people as possible to agree to go to net zero so that they're not producing too much carbon dioxide by the middle of the century. Now, I think it can be done. It's going to be very, very tough, this summit. And I'm very worried because it might go wrong and we might not get the agreements that we need. And it's touch and go.
The Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall will visit the Middle East for their first overseas tour since the start of the pandemic. Prince Charles and Camilla will tour Jordan and Egypt for 4 days from the 16th of November. A palace spokesperson said climate change will be one of the main themes of the visit, along with female empowerment. That's all your news for now. Let's get back to Dewbs & Co.
Thank you, Polly. Right, joining me to discuss tonight's talking points, we've got journalist and political commentator Benedict Spence, political commentator Joe Phillips, and academic Dr. Lisa McKenzie. Good evening to all of you.
Good evening.
I swear Lisa's hair is a lot brighter this week than it was when I last saw her. Apparently, she said it's all the sun up north that you've been getting. It's natural, yeah, natural vitamin D. I think that's what I need. You know the drill by now. I like to know what you think as well on all the topics that we're discussing tonight. You can join in the conversation on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews, or of course, you know all this by now if you're a regular viewer. We're everywhere: TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. I don't think I've missed any. Whatever you think about the topics, get in touch. I like debate, I like disagreement, I like differing opinions. I think that's what is missing often in society these days. We've got to be able to respectfully agree to disagree, which means all views are indeed valid. Anyway, we'll be talking about a lot tonight, as I mentioned, NHS. We'll be talking about landlords, students, protests. We've got it all going on. But first, our top story, the NHS. We all know by now, don't we? It's struggling, to put it bluntly. And Chancellor Rishi Sunak has the answer, apparently, a £6 billion cash injection. And that is what we're going to need to clear the NHS backlogs. I don't mean to be cynical, but of course I'll believe it when I see it. But this money is going to be spent on millions more checks, scans and procedures. Apparently, as I said, all of this is going to undo the damage that's been caused by the pandemic. And I have to laugh because, I mean, we're talking about massive waiting lists, aren't we? The longest since records began. So I think that we're going to need an awful lot. And I just don't know, is money going to be the answer? They'll be spending this, by the way, on CT scans, MRI scans, ultrasound scans, and surgical hubs as well will be created. All of it, as I mentioned, about tackling these waiting lists. Benedict, what do you think?
I don't really look at this as being too different from, the norm. I understand, obviously, we've had the pandemic and that's been a real shock to the system, but ultimately, you look at a lot of the reasons that have been given for why it is that the NHS is going to struggle this winter, and it's not just the coronavirus. They're talking about things like the flu and colds having a real impact. And, without meaning to sound too unsympathetic, we have this every year, regardless of whether or not it's been a good year, a bad year, pandemic, nothing at all. The NHS is always in some sort of winter crisis. And the fact that we find ourselves here again, despite the fact that the economy of the country has been geared towards protecting the NHS, looking after the NHS and getting around a lot of the issues thrown up by the coronavirus, just shows you that there hasn't been proper planning. This hasn't been taken seriously. And sooner or later, you do have to come to the point where you say, actually, why are we throwing more money? I understand you need to unblock the backlog, but what is being done to stop there from being backlogs in the first place? Because it affects every single part of the NHS, everything from cancer to A&E to paediatrics, it doesn't matter. It has an impact, and you have to look at something beyond just throwing more money on the fire. If the fire continues to burn, what is the point in that? Yeah, I think really, one always wants to tread very carefully, because if you say, well, the NHS needs reform, then immediately people say, oh, so you want to privatise it, and that's not necessarily what you want to do. It's very telling, though, I think, that the UK is the only country in the world, only first world country in the world, that has a system like its, and the United States is the only one that has a system akin to its own, and the rest of the developed world actually has very different systems of how they handle their healthcare systems. And I really do think that it is time that we took a far more adult approach to healthcare in this country, and that extends to everything: how we fund it, what aspects you put more money into, but also how people live their lives in terms of personal responsibility.
That requires politicians to think beyond the next electoral cycle.
Yes.
So it's a pointless endeavour.
Well, I mean, you can throw money, as you say, into the NHS. You could throw all the money that you could have, and it won't make any difference unless you get staff. I mean, this is great. This is capital expenditure. So this is for, as you said, MRI scanners, CT scans and kit. Lots and lots of kit. But if you haven't got anyone to operate the kit, it's just going to sit there. And we know of hospitals in past years, lovely, shiny new hospitals, nobody there to staff them. And that's the real problem. Yeah. But also I agree with what Benedict says, that you've got to also look at the underlying health problems and what can be prevented to stop the strain on the NHS. And that requires intervention in social issues like housing and unemployment and diet and school and all of those other things that have a huge impact on people's quality of life.
Yeah, Lisa as well. I mean, well, you tell me your thoughts, then I've got another point.
Well, what I did today, I started to have a look back at some of the past budgets, and in 2004...
Was you bored?
No, I was just sort of a bit annoyed. I wanted to do a bit of research and impress you, Michelle. So.
I'm very impressed. I like it. And what did you discover?
Well, I discovered in 2014 that sort of the big announcement at the time was how great the NHS had done over the last 4 years by saving 20 billion in. By doing more with less. And this was sort of the catchword 2014, we need to do more with less. And I think one of the things that we've got to remember is this is 2021. The problems that we're hitting now, yes, some of it is a pandemic, but you know, it's a health service. We should carry slack in the system for things like this. But when our system was cut to such an extent to the bone as it was from 2010 onwards, and you know, ministers were sort of talking about more for less. Where we are now is that policy didn't work. Austerity clearly has been a disaster, and we're probably going to end up paying twice as much as we would have if we'd not had austerity. And I completely agree. Looking at one particular issue when the structure is breaking, you know, the NHS is our health service, but it's only one part of our social services.
Yeah, and if you've got bad housing,
yeah,
you know, you're living in overcrowded, and I know we're going to talk about private renting in a little while, but, you know, if you live in bad housing, the chances are your health is going to suffer. If you live on very polluted roads, your health will suffer. If you have got all sorts of problems and you haven't got a district nurse, you haven't got access to social care, you know, you're
mental health.
All of those, mental health. I mean, you know, and there is still no joined up social and health care. So you've got people in hospital who actually shouldn't be there. You've got people in the community who need much more treatment and they're not getting it. So, you know, buying lots of machinery is not the answer.
Well, I'll tell you something that makes me laugh. You know, we talk, Benedict, you're absolutely right. It is every single winter there is a winter crisis. Now, this year, apparently, it's our responsibility to fix this and prevent this winter crisis. It's not on my watch, unfortunately, because I don't see it as my responsibility to look after the failings in the NHS. I think the NHS is there to look after me, but not just me, by the way, taxpayers. But one of the things that's got me is if the NHS is in such dire straits, why is Sajid Javid today saying that he is, I quote, strongly leaning towards putting in vaccine mandates for NHS workers? Because I think this would affect around 100,000 members of staff that haven't had or don't want to have or whatever it is, the vaccine. So if you've got a system that is creaking, you're about to walk into a winter where you're going to struggle to cope, why are you enforcing a policy that is potentially going to lose you up to 100,000 staff?
Well, we're seeing this elsewhere, aren't we? We're seeing this in the United States, lots of healthcare workers being laid off because they aren't prepared to take the vaccine. And yeah, to me, I look at it and I think it's almost like it's a discipline thing. It's almost sort of daring people not to and saying, well, we can do this. You know, we can get rid of you if you won't do what we say. You know, I understand why it is that they want all of their healthcare professionals to be vaccinated, because the message that they've been putting out for a very long time is that vaccines are vitally important. They're a vitally important component of getting life back to normal. So if you have lots of healthcare workers not taking it, it slightly undermines the message. But it is a real...
hospital with people
absolutely.
Who are at
but
risk.
The problem is, of course, having the vaccine doesn't necessarily stop you from getting it and passing it on to somebody. And, you know, if you're going with the argument that it protects vulnerable people, of which there are a lot, obviously, in hospitals, it's not actually a very convincing argument, because it doesn't stop you from getting it and passing it on. Actually, it's a far better argument to say that, you know, you should be looking to get everybody else vaccinated. You should be looking for all the vulnerable members of society first, actually ahead of hospital staff. And, you know, this is, you know, we'll come to this later, obviously, talking about schools and everything. And that's the kind of the real visceral issue for me is we're sort of, you know, putting a lot of pressure on lots of different components of society to have the vaccine, when actually the fundamental thing is you need to get the elderly and the vulnerable up to date all the time if they want it. Those are the ones that are most at risk.
They can still get infected.
Of course
and you know, at the moment we've got care home staff having to be vaccinated.
But I think this is disgraceful, by the way. I think an employer telling somebody, unless you have your body injected with something, you cannot have your job.
Most
awful.
Most frontline NHS staff will already have injections for hepatitis that we don't normally have. They have boosters for polio
But
and
there's a
stuff
difference,
like that.
though, isn't there, with this particular vaccine? There is no long-term safety data on this one particular vaccine.
I think there's also something else that's worth pointing out, is that even if you have the vaccine, if you're vulnerable, there's a very good chance you will die anyway. This is something that actually, you know, people I think have got to come to terms with. Well, no, you do have to come to terms with it. It doesn't matter if everybody is vaccinated. Lots of people are going to die anyway.
But is there not a bigger...
borne in mind.
Is there not a philosophical sort of debate around this, about the individual and what we expect from the individual nowadays, which is almost everything. You know, we've got a system that we're talking about right now about creaking in all different ways, and yet the message is this is down to the individual. The individual must always take responsibility. So I think what my philosophical underpinning of this is about the way that we are trying to move the structural issues that are problematic away from the structure and trying to sort of push it onto the individual and say it's your fault. And I think we've got to stop doing that.
Well, that's the line that Sajid Javid took last week at the press conference. In fact, when I was on this programme with you last week, you know, it was sort of basically, it's down to you, it's down to you.
And I think that's really
which is completely wrong.
Yeah.
But there is a point within, you know, healthcare and a healthy society where, you know, we've had a smoking ban, which has had a huge impact on cutting people smoking, and that's had a huge impact on health. There are always calls for, you know, sugar tax and stuff like that, and amazingly, food and drink companies can suddenly work out how to cut sugar and salt in products if there's any sort of whisker of some sort of legislation. And we do have to take a little bit of responsibility, because the health service isn't there for us to go, well, I've been smoking, drinking and sitting on my bum for the last, you know, 40 years, now sort it out. That's not what it's for.
Well, does anybody do that? I mean, then, again, I think there's a lot of rhetoric around that.
No, I don't think,
you know, bad individuals, not doing as they're told.
But there are, but I think the point is, Lisa, that I think there are ways of helping people. And, you know, one of them, for instance, is good quality school meals. Well, on the one hand, you know, you've got pour this money into the health service, but you can bet your bottom dollar that Rishi Sunak will not be backing free school meals during the holiday.
This is the thing that always gets my goat when it comes to every budget. There is always money for the healthcare service for people who are already sick. They're already in this position. There's a tiny fraction of that for education, which actually is where you need to start. You need to address people when it comes to things like nutrition, exercise, learning sort of mental sort of stability, coping techniques, all these sorts of things. You can build stronger adults from a starting point if you put money into education, but we never want to do that.
Can we also just say as well that you know, I agree with what you're saying, but there are also other things as well, like bad working conditions, bad living conditions, and that causes ill health and stress upon people as well. So it's not just preparing people for better health, it's about structuring the system so people can actually live
and you
a
can't
decent
look at
life.
The health service in isolation from everything
That's
else.
certainly true, but I do just think it's the sign of a fundamentally sick society, one that wants to put more money into the already broken rather than trying to build more resilient things in the first place.
Because governments are too cowardly to
we
say,
can agree on
right,
that. Yes.
You know, we're going to have to take a look at this. We're going to have to think about what the health service is for, what it does, and what other agencies
I think
can deal with
that review needs to hurry up, doesn't it? And just hurry up and happen. And I think, Benedict, I'm not going to. Gosh, I've learnt that, tell you. But I think, Benedict, you're absolutely right. Ultimately, why would you put more money into a bucket that has holes? Connie has contacted us over the email. She says, no, we shouldn't be throwing more money at the NHS. The way to improve it, she says, is to properly manage it. There's too many chiefs and not enough Indians, and so there is waste. She goes on to say about agency workers and lots of different aspects. Connie, you sound quite good. I think you should apply for a job with the NHS, helping them manage their procurement or something. You've got some good ideas there. But do let me know your thoughts as well. I'm going to take a quick break, and when I come back, I'm going to be asking you, what about these protests at the school gates around the COVID vaccine? There's been some strong words being said about that today from Keir Starmer, and of course Priti Patel will have that and more after the break.
On Brazier at 8, is COVID really destined to fall away in the run-up to Christmas? I'll be speaking to the SAGE member who's told the government not to panic. Also, I'm joined by one of the most influential and satirical voices in America's culture wars, Mark Stein. And is the suit finished? Why the most famous name on Savile Row is hanging by a thread. That's Brazier from 8.
Hello there, welcome back. Now, the Home Secretary has called for a complete crackdown on the so-called anti-vaccine protesters who have targeted schools across the country in recent days. Priti Patel wants the crackdown in response to warnings from educational leaders over the scale of abuse and intimidation faced by pupils and staff. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has got involved as well and said that councils should be allowed to establish so-called exclusion zones outside of schools to stop the anti-vaccination protesters. Reports suggest that pupils at some schools were sent home early on the advice of the police. So I'm interested, do you think these protests should be able to happen at the school gates? Jo?
I think anything that puts children, parents or staff at risk or makes them feel threatened going to their place of work and their place of learning is wrong. It doesn't matter what the protest is. We've seen this before with abortion clinics, and local councils do have the power. They're called public space protection orders, but they're a little bit complicated and they take quite a long time because you have to have a period of consultation and so on and so forth. And so I think what Keir Starmer is arguing for, while Priti Patel is obviously calling for a crackdown because she wants to crack down on absolutely everything, but I think Keir Starmer is saying, let's speed up this process. It's not right that anybody should have to walk, through a barrage of abuse. It doesn't matter whether it's anti-vaccine, anti-milk, anti-school dinners, whatever it is. It's wrong to intimidate people.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Jo, what Keir Starmer is saying is this consultation, he says it could be expedited, and therefore they reckon that it could be in place within 5 days and last for 6 months. Benedict, I'll tell you what gets me about this. I happen to remember back in, I think it was March this year, when there was a school in Batley and there was a group of, I mean, I don't even really want to call them parents because I just think that a lot of them were just people that travelled to Batley to protest. It was incredibly intimidating. I would suggest that it was quite aggressive, in my view anyway. The school had to close, and I've searched and searched and searched because I thought maybe I missed it, maybe I've forgotten it. I desperately was looking for the responses and the reactions and the tough talking from people like Priti Patel, from people like Keir Starmer back in March at those protests, and guess what? I couldn't find any. So then I found this a little bit hypocritical that on this topic, all of a sudden, there's all these levers that they can pull with great desperation, given the topic in hand today. What's your thought?
Well, of course, that's because our politicians don't want to upset certain communities that they don't know very much about. And that's actually the reality of certainly the Muslim community in the north of England, is our politicians don't know that much about them and don't care to learn that much about them. They don't really want to get involved in the issue because they are worried that they'll be accused of racism or of Islamophobia. And that speaks to their spinelessness. Whereas, as we've already discussed, the vaccines are something that they have told us repeatedly are a good thing and something that everybody must have. So they feel a lot more strongly about being able to go after people who intimidate children. Ultimately, I agree. It's if it's down to a question of intimidating or children's safety, it's not acceptable. The question I think actually that you raised there is whether or not they are parents, because one does have to tread a little bit carefully if it is parents involved, because what's being taught to children is actually something to do with parents, and they should be able to have a say if they don't like what's being done. Now, that's not the same as saying that they should be able to block people from learning or anything like that, but there do need to be forums in which parents can vent their frustrations if they have them, and not have it be that they are, in some cases, allowed to get away with what it is that they want to say, and in others shut down completely and sort of sidelined as marginalised.
But are you suggesting that it's parents protesting?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I think that's a key question, though. And I would say, even if it were parents protesting, I would say, well, there are better forums in which to do this, better places to go. Yeah. But I don't think that, I don't know right now whether or not it's parents. If it's people coming in from outside, well, yes, obviously that's unacceptable.
I mean, I suppose I'm conflicted again about it. I always think probably too deeply about everything. But I've been on protest many times. I've done lots of pickets. I've prevented people doing lots of things, actually, for things that I believe is right. And, particularly around housing and housing issues. So I have been on protests and I have picketed. Although I agree with you, when it comes to education and children, I think there is something about preventing children from going to school and being safe at school. There is something that is very wrong about that. But then again, I swing into this idea of the councils and the politicians deciding on what you know, what it is that we can protest against and what can't we.
But the simple thing would be to say that around a school is a public space protection order.
Yes.
That doesn't seem that unreasonable to me.
I feel like I need to have an alarm that sounds anytime I hear hypocrisy. I don't mean from you, but I mean the point that you've just made then about when it comes to disrupting education, that's when maybe we need to start saying, right, that's our red line, education's disrupted, step in. And then I sit down and think, well, hang on a minute, because the people that have actually disrupted education is the government with their policies. That's
why I'm conflicted.
So why aren't they having a word with themselves as opposed to this?
Yeah, and that's
I'm
why
conflicted as well, because any efforts to sort of reduce protest, legitimate protest, or illegitimate protest, is always takes as an opportunity to curb the powers of people to press legitimate. And we've seen that with the recent policing bill, and this is something that Bridget Tell is quite keen on.
There is intimidation, Ben, and intimidation of children is not right. I mean, you know, fine, go on a picket, go on a protest, you know, you're by and large dealing with adults who are making a choice or whatever.
Yeah.
But to go back to, you know, the point I made earlier about abortion clinics, you know, actually women going into birth control clinics or sexual health clinics should not be intimidated.
Yes, absolutely.
And if you say, all right, so no women, no children, then you end up with another red line. So it's much easier to actually...
But do we trust, but this, I think this again, do we trust our local authorities to decide which cause? And so I think that's...
Of course not. Of course
This is what I was going to say, is of all governments...
No, but you can be very discreet and you can have a clinic, a Mary Stopes clinic, for instance, with nothing on the outside that says what it is. But a school is a school is a school, and it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And it does seem to me that it's not beyond, you know, you wouldn't allow a burger van to set up outside a school.
Well, hang on, let me just
I would actually.
I was going to say, you picked the wrong audience.
So let me play devil's advocate then, because we're talking here, and my view, by the way, is it's just you either have a rule, which is you can't protest against outside schools, or you don't, and that gets all of this grey area away. But then, let me play devil's advocate a bit. What about when it's the pupils doing the protest? Because I seem to recall, and I've got to say I didn't put research into this, so I'm using my memory, so it might fail me a little bit, but I think it was Pimlico Academy, where people were protesting on various different things. I think it was uniforms and whether people could wear trousers or whatever, whether there was a flag. I might be conflating two different schools here.
But they were protesting within their school. And at their school, to their school. That's a huge difference.
So pupils protesting inside school and disrupting their own education, that's OK, but adults protesting on the boundary isn't.
Well, I don't...
Wasn't there a case of a school recently where the pupils tried to take down Israeli flags because they didn't agree with Israel's policy on Palestine, and the school said that's not acceptable? Because, again, then you're getting into the sort of the nuances of what's allowed within a school and what's not.
If the kids are saying, you know, we don't want these uniforms or we don't want these new rules, they're having a protest at school. So they've taken their protest to the people who are making that decision. It's not right to intimidate children or, you know, dinner ladies or caretakers or teachers or teaching assistants or children walking on their own.
Which is why, Michelle, I think it's very important that you raise the Batley thing, because it's important to remember that that teacher is still not back at work and is still in hiding. And actually, there has not been, as you say, that much of a political pushback against that. Whereas for something that's far more politically acceptable and less of a hot topic like vaccines, the government feels more than happy to potentially come up with legislation.
I mean, I worry that, you know, do I trust Priti Patel and Keir Starmer to have immediate legislation to stop people doing something that they could that is there then for whatever they need to use it in the future? And I think that's where my concerns are. It's that bit.
And I agree with you on that, you know, it's very easy for politicians to come out and say, we're going to have a crackdown, we'll bring in a new law. Actually, look at the laws you've already got. You can do this, you can just speed up the process. You know, you can do that without bringing in something new, and you can review it.
And by the way, I do think it's probably worth saying as well that the people that are protesting, you know, if any of them's watching this, they would say we're not trying to intimidate children. What they would say is because you've got this whole kind of, is it Gillett competency, where children can actually consent to this vaccine for themselves based on informed consent. And some of the protesters would argue that they don't feel like the children are being given full, transparent disclosure of the information, and what they're trying to do is inform these children or give the children the proper education. I'm not defending what they do or not do.
Then,
it's up
you know,
to...
get in touch with the school, get in touch with the school governors, organise a meeting.
But I think people have done that. When I was looking at the statistics, actually, of what classes schools being kind of protested against, when you actually broke it down, I might even have some of them here, when you actually broke it down, a lot of the protest was actually letters being written. So it was letters, not actually people standing outside. So yeah, so the ASC, the Association of School and College Leaders, what they're actually saying that is out of 526 responses from the schools, only 13% had reported seeing protesters outside of their schools. So out of 526, 13%. So there you go. It's quite a small number.
So it's quite a small number. And, you know, anyway, whoever had a crackdown, whether it's Priti Patel or Keir Starmer, it's not going to stop people writing to the school. But there's a huge difference, I think, between intimidating kids and making a protest.
I think there's also something about politicians, like Michelle said, coming out and making these snap decisions and talking.
Don't be hypocrites. Yeah. Don't start, you know, getting angry and creating laws for one subject while simultaneously ignoring protests against another. That's what I say. Anyway, Rob on GB Views email says that I think they should be allowed to protest when the government uses places of education as vaccine centres. Interesting take. So what he's saying there is, it's almost, there's a grey area between a school, when is a school versus when is a school a vaccination clinic, if that's what it's being deployed for. That's an actually interesting point you raised there, Rob. And Zoe says schools are for teaching, not deciding pupils' medical intervention. She says that is for the parents. So do get in touch, keep your views coming tonight. Let's move on. Pressure is mounting for the government to introduce a registration scheme to help councils target rogue landlords renting out thousands of dangerous homes to families. A document spelling out the government's plans for raising standards in the private rented sector, which will include, for example, a landlord register that would bring England into line with the rest of the UK, is expected by the winter. Do we need this, Lisa?
Yes, we do. We always need to watch what rogue landlords are doing, and actually any landlords are doing, because at the moment being a landlord is quite lucrative. So you know, if there's a lucrative industry, and people depend on those things for their health and well-being as a home is, then yes, we need to keep an eye on it. But this is just one thing. This is, you know, having a database on landlords is one thing. You know, we have got a housing crisis. We are using houses in this country or property in this country for everything else apart from homes. And I think for me, this is a step, but we've got to have the big conversation about what is a home and who should have a home, because I think we have disconnected that. Houses now are about getting your kids into a certain school or a pension or investment, and actually, you know, the link between a home and your human rights to have somewhere to live has been broken. So this is one thing. But it's not, and I also think, I hope as well that when we talk about rogue landlords, we are thinking about some of the social housing and councils that have let their properties go into disrepair purposefully, or as they call it, managed decline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a start, and where it is used, it is quite effective, mainly in London, and I think Leeds and a couple of other places. It does actually bring rogue landlords to some sort of account. But Lisa's absolutely right. We've got a massive housing crisis in this problem. We've got not enough social housing, and where I live, you know, there is no private rented stuff because everybody's bought up second properties that they're Airbnb-ing. Councils have been far too slow to catch on to this and work out that, you know, people are buying these things with the sole aim of making a fortune, dissipating the housing stock, which means that local people who are on low wages can't afford to live locally. So it's worse than just housing, which is bad enough. It's actually destroying communities.
You won't get any disagreement on this from me. This is where I become incredibly militant, because I'm part of the cohort of the under-30s who can't afford to buy their own houses, can't afford to therefore settle down, have children, any of those sorts of things, because wages are stagnating, but house prices continue to go up, and with house prices going up, up goes rent. So ultimately, yes, I've lived in some very poor accommodation in Liverpool, in London, sort of all over the place. Anything, frankly, that can be done to stop landlords from preying on people's lack of money and lack of ability to necessarily report their landlords or go elsewhere, I think is a good thing.
It's about safety. I mean, some of it is about basic safety.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a damp house, I've got asthma for the rest of my life. This is people my age, that's common to have respiratory diseases because of the damp that you had in your houses.
Yeah, I was reading through this earlier on, and apparently there's so many, or there's a number of landlords that are rogues, so-called rogue landlords, but then I just don't understand why you're not doing anything about that. I don't know why you'd sit there and go, yeah, that person, he or she, yeah, they're on a list. They're a rogue. Well, if you've put someone into a home where you're actually, you're risking someone's health and their safety, then you probably shouldn't be on a database. You should be in prison. That's what I think, and I just think, why are we kind of tickling around the edges of this?
I mean, it's true. Our society is one that's allowed this whole cladding scandal to come up of these, and you also have things like the leasehold issue in cities like London, where you buy the house and it turns out you don't really own it at all. As you say, Jo, the housing market in this country is completely broken. And does our government show any sign, really, of wanting to tackle it?
No, it's not the government, though. It's almost like there's a silence on this. So we can talk about the NHS and we can talk about education and we're going to talk about students, but housing, it's like, we can't do anything about it. There's nothing, it's, education.
But what can you do?
Well, we can. And
what can you do?
Well, one of the things that we could do is to stop building new houses that are not affordable.
Yeah.
We're building.
But they get sold, so they must be affordable.
Well, they're affordable to some people. So where were those people living before? We've got retail has taken a huge hit over the last couple of years. Town centres are dying on their street. Get rid of those retail centres, turn them into homes, proper homes, and actually you'd then find that the high street reinvented because
but how are you going to achieve that? You need to take me on your thinking, Jo, because you're losing me. So you're going to dictate to a private house builder how much they can sell their stock for?
No, but all local authorities have the power to say, we will have this amount of affordable housing.
But they do that now whenever there's a new complex.
And then they go,
they don't actually
we can't afford it. We're really sorry, but the costs have overrun. And I tell you what, we're going to do 2 of them, but they're not going to be here. They're going to be in a different place.
I mean, one of my favourite phrase here is affordable. That is it's such a fantastic phrase that Sadiq Khan loves that word, affordable housing. And what affordable means is 80% of the market rate. 80% of the market rate in London is either something like £1,400 a month rent or £400,000 for a 2-bedroom flat. So that's affordable. That's not affordable. No. So we need to start having conversations about housing, and really, everything else we talk about. If you don't have a home, you have nothing.
No, exactly.
By the way, I've got people messaging in that are landlords saying, because I think you've got to be fair as well. Not all landlords are bad people. It's not a bad thing.
Absolutely.
Someone's saying, believe me, it's not that lucrative to be a landlord. We have a licence system in Nottingham. We need less regulations, not more. And I think there's quite a few people, but also you've got the flip side as well about rogue landlords as well. But I have to say, Lisa, because someone's messaged in asking the question, I think we must have had it up on the screen, asking what on earth, I've lost it now, there it is, what on earth is, he doesn't say it like that, he says it differently, but what is an ethnologist? Is it ethnologist or ethnologist?
Only you can answer this.
Ethnographer. It's a research method. It just basically means that as an ethnographer, I go into a community and I talk to people and I get involved in the community, and then I write research based on that community. I write it with them, not about them. That's it.
Collaborative research.
Yes.
So like Gonzo, what's the phrase? I've completely lost. What's the study of civilizations or communities or something?
Do you mean anthropology?
Yes, that's Gonzo anthropology.
Yeah, it's a bit anthropological.
That sounds better.
In layman's terms, it's talking to people.
Oh, there you go. Leona's got in contact as well about the housing. What she says is, well, maybe the council houses should never have been sold because that depleted the stock in the UK. And she goes on to say there's never been any good housing estates built since the 1950s. She's saying a lot about is focused very much on apartment blocks. I have to say, Lisa agrees with you there. So, yeah, and you're getting nods as well from the show. I think, so basically...
and also, you see, the other thing is that local authorities were not allowed to keep keep the money from council house sales. So they didn't get
Where did it go then?
Back into central
Back into
government.
central government.
Yeah, so they
Probably
spent
on the NHS.
Okay, so local authorities that had housing stock, they sold it at a discount to the tenant.
Yeah.
And then the revenue from that went into Westminster.
So the councils hadn't got any money to go and build new houses.
You see, Dewbs and Co, every single day is an education. You've learned all about complex job titles. I've just learned something. I didn't realise that, by the way. I didn't realise the revenue from council house stock went back into central government. Who knew? Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about students. You know, everyone can do a degree pretty much for everything these days, can't you? Borrowing money from the government, of course, to do so. Should the government, therefore, be putting a limit on the number of people wanting basically to go and get an art degree or similar? We'll be talking about that and more after the break. Welcome back. We were just having a little chat in the break there, and Benedict referenced a protractor at school. Do you remember protractors? Whatever happened to them? Do they still have them? I've no idea. Apparently they do. Yeah, that was a blast from the past. That took me back. I'm definitely showing my age. Anyway, the government is considering new plans to limit the number of students studying so-called soft degrees. Often they get called Mickey Mouse degrees, don't they? Which some might say is insulting. Nonetheless, they do often produce lower salaries and therefore make them less likely to pay back, the students obviously, to pay back their student loans. This means plans could basically put a limit on degrees in the creative arts and other so-called lower league degrees. Arts funding, by the way, has already been cut by 50% or is planned to be cut by 50%. Your thoughts?
If it doesn't need a protractor, clearly it's an arts degree. You should be passing it down. I think we're far too sort of rigid in the way we look at our university courses. For a start, I think too many people are going to university. I think that's just, a lot of people go that don't need it. That's the ultimate thing that I feel, and that sort of degrades academia, that degrades a lot of the value of these courses. But on top of that, those that are going, even if fewer were to go, they are clearly paying too much. And I think that realistically, those two little aspects have got to change. I think that a lot of humanities degrees could be done in a lot less time, 2 years, 18 months rather than 3 years. Speaking from experience as somebody who's done one of those courses, I could have done it in a lot less time. That's not always going to be the case for everybody, but I do think that different universities should think about offering different things for different people that work better for them. But the key thing about this is talking about cutting the amount of people who can do them because you don't earn enough money to pay back your loan, which obviously, as I've just said, people shouldn't be getting into that much debt to do them in the first place. You cannot look at university entirely through the prism of how much money it makes you and the person that gives you the loan. That completely, I just think that is the complete antithesis of what a university is supposed to be. That's about, broadening your own sort of horizons, about your own...
And that's fine if you're paying for it yourself. If you want to broaden your own horizons on your own dam, that's not a problem. If you want to broaden them on the taxpayers' dam, that's slightly different, isn't it?
But education is a social good. It's another. It's a social good. It's the same as our health service. It's a social good and it's important. And one of the things about this, why I think this is completely wrong, is that we're on GBNews. We celebrate a lot of Great Britain being great. And one of our greatest things is our culture and our creative industries, actually. And by cutting them, only allowing certain people to go to certain universities and do specific subjects, narrows everything that we are in great...
Why don't you let everyone go everywhere they want and pay for it themselves then?
Well, again, but you could say the same thing about the NHS. If people want healthcare, they should pay for it themselves. But we've got social goods, and we believe
there's a bit of a difference wanting good health versus wanting to study Picasso.
No, I don't know. I think
it's very good for the soul.
I think I've been at a conference all weekend, a literary festival for working class writers, and actually listening to working class poets talk about their own experiences has been great for my soul.
But also, I agree pretty much with what Lisa and Benedict have said. Education exists for education. It shouldn't be, how much are you going to earn in order to pay back this loan? I do think, however, that too many people do go to university, and I do think that they need a little bit more help and guidance, and I think the media and creative arts sector suffers terribly. And one of the reasons that it is so imbalanced is that to get into it, to have a work experience, often requires doing something for nothing, which I think is fundamentally wrong. I used to work for a charity called the Creative Society, which was about getting young people into the arts and creative sector and making sure they were paid properly. But if at the moment, if you're well connected or well off, you can get in, you can get a job for nothing, whether it's in publishing or television or radio or whatever. I've taught media studies, and half the time you think, you're never going to make a journalist, you're never going to make this, because you...
But isn't that for the company, though, to put in schemes to attract talent from different things? I just want to point out to you all as well, because you're all saying about, it shouldn't be about money and this and that. We started this programme talking about the NHS being basically on its knees pretty much, and the fact that £6 billion has been awarded by Rishi, or about to be awarded, to try and fix this. Well, just to give you this context, we're talking about £6 billion to go into the NHS. 140 billion is what's outstanding in student loans. So I think, actually, when it comes to taxpayers' funds...
But here's, to go back to the NHS then, is one of the things that has caused the great shortage of staff is by making nursing a degree only, which meant that the whole layer that used to be the SENs, estate-enrolled nurses, who were by and large women, but who were supremely practical, really good, fantastically kind, wonderful nurses. They are no longer wanted in the health service. You've either got a degree or you're a cleaner, pretty much. And that's damaged the health service. And we put pressure on kids to go to university, get a degree, when actually what we really need to have a conversation about is there are other ways to do things.
I like the old art schools and the old polytechnics. I think when the universities decided they all wanted to be when all colleges wanted to be give out degrees and be universities, it took the education system from a social good in the market. And for me, that's where you've got to get education out. You've got to get it out of the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got things like, Workers' Education Association, all of those things that were so brilliant.
Well, we could go on. These guys could go on anyway, but I just want to talk about one last topic before we say goodbye. Working from home. Lots of us have been doing that, haven't we? Lots of us have not been lucky enough to do that as well. But apparently, one businesswoman says it's bad parenting to work from home. This is Tina Knight, who's the chairman of Women in Business. She's told one of the news programmes today that parents that work from home set a bad example to their children. Well, I've got to say, anyone that's got children, if your kid's anything like mine, I'm not sure you would be able to work from home while simultaneously parenting. So yes, it might work for some. For others, they're desperate to get out the house and go to work. I can tell you. Lisa, your thoughts?
I think this is one of those issues. It's one of those conversations again that comes up every 20 years about what should women do. You know, it's about what are women supposed to do in society. After the Second World War, you know, there was reports saying that women who went out to work was basically abusing their children. And I think this is one of those conversations again. It's a conversation about what is motherhood and who are women. And so I'm going to really push against this and say, you know, if women can work at home and that suits them and their family, that's a good thing. And if they want to get out and their kids want to go to nursery or, you know, school, that's fine as well.
And also, it's a way of saying to kids, I'm not with you now, I'm working. You know, I'm shutting the office door, going down to the shed or the studio or, the, you know, whatever it is you're doing. Lots of people work from home. I mean, this woman, I don't know what planet or century she's living in, but she talked about people, you know, working for an hour in the morning, having a long lunch and then an hour in the afternoon. Well, nobody I know does that.
You've got a toddler, good luck.
Benedict, your
Speaking
thoughts?
as an expert on motherhood,
Yeah.
no, I think just broadly the ways that she's phrased it is as if there is a binary about this. It is either good to work from home or bad. The future is going to be that some companies will run offices, others will allow people to be more flexible, because ultimately not everybody is the same, and some companies will only be able to function as office-based businesses. That's fine. But I think I tell you what, she must be a very brave woman to say to any other mother what makes a good mother or doesn't, because ultimately I think, well, as we've heard, I think, you know, on average, a lot of people have some rather interesting opinions and they are not always the right
Yeah, when you
ones.
have kids, there's never a shortage of people looking
right.
on and telling you what you're doing wrong, I can tell you that. Anyway, Ray has been in contact. He wishes to make a complaint, he says, about Michael Dewbs. That's actually a footballer, Ray. My name's Michelle.
What's wrong with Michael Dewbs?
Ray is furious with me because he says that I'm a selfish anti-vaxxer. Well, Ray, listen, I'm not a selfish anti-vaxxer at all. I have incredibly strong views on mandation. I think that mandating anyone to inject anything into their body is absolutely wrong. I will stand up to it with everything that I have. If you think that makes me a selfish anti-vaxxer, that is indeed your prerogative.
You were good at Birmingham as well. That was a good stint for you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I went to a Players Academy. What can I say? Lots of you still getting in contact about housing as well. Really divided opinions going on here. Make courses, Kaz has said, make courses for what we need free, i.e. if you're qualified to be a doctor, you work for 5 years in the NHS and then your debt is paid off. So Kaz there is suggesting an alternate approach. And yeah, I've got to say, there's some good merit in this. Why aren't we approaching different topics with different attitudes? But then you guys would tell me that that's wrong, isn't it? So I don't know, but different opinions. Anyway, that is all we've got time for. We could go on, but we shall not. Instead, we'll park it for tonight and we'll come back tomorrow instead. Joe, Lisa, Benedict, thank you all for your time and for the debate. And thank you as well for your company tonight. Keep your views coming in, and if there's ever a topic that you want us to debate on this show, do get in touch. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs. But as I just said, that is all for tonight. I will be back at exactly the same time tomorrow, 6 o'clock until 7 o'clock. Coming up at the top of the hour is Nigel Farage. So you have yourselves a very good evening, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Hi there. There'll be some rain during the next 24 hours, especially in the north. Strong southwesterly winds for all, and those winds will be very mild indeed. At the moment, a westerly breeze is pushing showers in from the west, but those showers easing overnight. This next weather front bringing a thickening of cloud by dawn and some outbreaks of rain, especially to northern parts of the UK. But it's really through the evening that the showers disappear across many central and eastern parts of the UK. Clear skies then for eastern England, northeast Scotland as well. Thicker cloud arrives into the west by dawn and some outbreaks of rain into Northern Ireland and western Scotland. Temperatures then rising through the night in the northwest, but they'll fall and it'll be a Fairly chilly start for eastern parts of England. A bright start, though, and a few mist patches first thing, soon lifting. Into the afternoon, and spells of rain across northern parts of the UK before it turns drier and brighter. Some cloud breaks developing, and it will be windy. That wind coming from the southwest, so very mild air at the moment, 16 or 17 Celsius in the south, 14 to 16 further north. But it is windy, with the wind bouncing over the hills of northern England and southern Scotland to bring some strong wind gusts to the northeast, and some gales around northern and western coast of Scotland, along with heavy rain for a time. That rain sinks south overnight, and so by the start of Wednesday, it's wet for southern Scotland, Cumbria, Northern Ireland.